heard about mission drift in organizations. Mission drift is, well, we set out to do one thing, but there's mission creep, but people suggested some other things, we went off in another direction. Or, in an organization that has market-based transactions, we were led away from our mission toward the things that were easier to get funded through market-based transactions. So that would be mission, some people would call that mission drift. I don't think that's drift. The key observation, I call it shear because you remember what wind shear is. Wind shear is a systematic force that's blowing you off course. So the issue here is that you might set up your organization to be market-based transaction funded and have that actively pulling you away from the mission. If so, you're not well designed. What we're looking for is designs where the market-based part is directly helping us with the mission, as well as creating funds that might be useful for the mission more generally. So the key notion is mission drift would be random forces that are pushing you one way or another. So an example is donors who come into the enterprise and say, well, that's all very well and good what you've been doing, but we think it would be better if you did something else. And they in effect nominate a different mission, and many organizations follow that for need of funding. Mission shear is a systematic force that's pushing you away from what you really intended to do. So I'll give you an example of what that might look like. An example would be a microfinance bank set up as a for-profit that is being pulled away from what its initial mission was because in order to maintain its for-profit status and in order to get capital requirements for the regulators, it's having to give bigger and bigger loans. Well, that's not what it intended to do. The idea of microfinance, the idea of microfinance is that it's supposed to help people who need a small amount of money, not a large amount of money. So if the market forces are set up in a way that it pulls us away from what we're trying to do, that's mission shear. And that's one of the things I want you to think about as you design your enterprises, design your organizations, and think about the relationship between the mission and the market-based transaction. I'll give you a specific example of this. An organization called Opportunity International, quite terrific, very socially mission-driven organization that operates in about 40 countries. They went through this process in their microfinance lending in Ghana. It began as a non-profit microlender. In order to improve its services, it became a for-profit lender. That allowed it to bring in more capital through deposits. It allowed it to bring in, to be able to borrow money in local capital markets. It allowed it to create incentives for expansion and growth, all of which sounds like it's good for the mission and should be good for the mission. But the problem is there's a goals conflict. If what you are saying to people is we want you to drive up profits in this bank because that's going to help us expand, the easiest way to do that is to give larger loans because larger loans are more profitable per loan and they take less time per unit of interest that you're going to earn on them, and therefore there's a tendency for loan officers to increase the size of the loans over time. So that's a potential conflict between what we really set out to do. Remember, the social mission was supposed to be at the heart of the enterprise. So that's a conflict between the social mission and the incentives that we've created in the organization through the market-based transaction mechanism. So a key issue for us, we want to use, and this is the idea that Jur and others were inventing, we want to use a design in which the market-based transaction is pushing us toward the mission, not pulling us away from it, in which there's a high degree of alignment. So the easiest way, and the problem, the goals conflict as I've explained, is that the easiest way to improve margins is by increasing loan sizes, and that's not what we intended to do. So the social mission is actually served through the smaller loans, and so we got to figure out a way to keep us focused on that. The pressure, this pressure away from what we intended to do, mission shear, that's what we got to try to avoid.